Hello and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Universe Podcast. Friends, I hope you've enjoyed that long hiatus from the last time we were doing a Star Wars week-to-week episode of a TV show. It used to be we waited about a year and then 3 or 6 months, and now it's 3 weeks. But here we are back. It is not quite the beginning of the new year, but Bad Batch is going to be starting soon, and so myself and Erin McGowan wanted to do a primer. This is for people who haven't seen Season 1 and just want to kind of get up to speed, or if you have seen it and you just want to get reminded of some of the good stuff, or just you love it, you're going to watch it again and you want to talk about it, this is the podcast for you. So all that and more right after this commercial break. That this episode will come out after Christmas, so I hope it's going to be about New Year's sales. So enjoy. Welcome back. My name is Matthew. I'm your host. I'll be joined by Erin McGowan, who's going to be my host throughout the Bad Batch run. We're hopefully going to have some great guests in every now and then. But Erin, I hadn't even finished the question about asking if you'd be interested in being the regular on the Bad Batch, and your eyes lit up and you were leaning into the microphone. Talk to me about why this particular thing is something you're so excited for.
Oh my gosh, yes. Okay, so Bad Batch is just so special to me because, as I've said before on the show, I grew up with Clone Wars. So having another show that is that same style animation, even though it's worlds better, the animation is incredible to look at, but it's the same style, you know? Right. It's just so nostalgic and it feels happy and safe to me. So just going into it, I was really excited about that. And I watched it and I loved it. I'm obsessed with clones. Yeah. I love clones. Anything about clones, I'm yes, please. I was so happy to see some clones back in season 1. We saw some Rex. Actually, and we saw some Gregor too. Excited for more possible cameos. But I just really liked the show. I liked the inclusion of Omega. I thought that she was a good, kind of a fresh perspective on a clone, you know?
Yeah.
So
I think I'm kind of in the same place. And for those who have no idea what we're talking about, I promise we will kind of give some background and overall stuff. We're just kind of going the overall thoughts at the moment. But I think you're right. I think the Bad Batch, there's a bit of summary, but the Bad Batch, for those who don't know, is a group of clones that were first introduced in Season 7 of the Clone Wars, which is, I just think, one of the best seasons of television ever made in general, particularly of Star Wars. But the idea is that they're clones, but they're clones that have been played with, in that they're not exact replicas. Something has been done to the DNA sequencing of them. And we learned over the course of season 1 that it was somewhat intentional, so that each of them has certain things emphasized. They don't look the same. And they're basically a special ops unit of the clones. And they're a great set of characters. And that one of the things I think I really like, and that Omega is this person who we meet throughout the course of the show, who is a young girl, but is also a clone herself. I think the idea is that she is being aged normally instead of the rest, and that there's something she is in some ways kind of the purest form left of the clone DNA. And so the Kaminoans wanted to get her back. And that there's a whole bunch of story around that, and we'll get into that. But I think part of what I loved about this so much is that it wound up being a story a lot about the clones, both about, what were the clones doing after Order 66? And it goes into all this stuff about the Empire and, why aren't the clones still in the Empire? How did they phase out clones and work in, conscripted stormtroopers instead? Mm-hmm. But also just, we get so much more history. We get to learn so much more about what was happening with the clones during all this in a way that, once we take the Jedi off the table, I just think we were seeing so much more of them.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed the clone focus and just to look into what did happen, because that was such a big question mark. We know that the stormtroopers aren't clones, but we know that the clones stayed a part of the Empire, so what happened? And so I think that's what we're gonna get throughout this show. We're already starting to see some of it, there's clones that don't really go along with the Empire, there's Gregor, there's Hauser, which, oh my god, Hauser is the love of my life. I cannot wait. I am begging for more Hauser on screen. If we do not get more, I will riot.
For those folks who maybe don't have a encyclopedic knowledge of which clone is which, and which clone did what in what episode or in what fan fiction, who is Hauser? Tell us a bit more about who Hauser is and his background.
Yeah, so Hauser is a clone. I think he's a captain. And he is located on Ryloth at the end of the war. So he's been working very closely with Cham Syndulla, which is Hera Syndulla's father. He was a freedom fighter. So kind of in the episodes Devil's Deal and Rescue on Ryloth, I actually just watched them this morning because they're some of my favorites, but that goes and talks about Hera Syndulla and what was happening to her when she was a child and the Empire moved into Ryloth. And so Hauser is one of the clones caught in the middle where he's been on Ryloth defending these people and fighting for these people for years. And then, you know, the Republic became the Empire. He kind of went with that change and is starting to see, like, oh, this is not the same as the Republic. This is different. This is worse. As he's there closely working with Admiral Rampart, which is kind of like our stand-in Tarkin. He's like our bad guy in season 1.
Mm-hmm. It's funny how when we talked about Resistance just a few weeks ago, you talked about how Pike was kind of the like Gwendolyn Christie, like Phasma stand-in. Exactly. Because they couldn't pay Gwendolyn Christie to be on every episode. And I think this is the exact same. Like, they had the technology to get a little bit of Tarkin voice, but then they gave us a diet Tarkin.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that leaves open the possibility of Tarkin being a bigger character later in the series. I think they kind of did that in Rebels, where they kind of just the bigger bad got bigger and bigger as the show went on.
Right.
But yeah, things I'm excited for this show. I want more Hauser. He's so sexy. Like, I'll just say it. He's got this like explosion scar on one side of his face, and he has these little gray hairs. Oh my God. I'm like, look at him aging so fast. He's so precious. He needs to be loved. Ugh. Yep. Okay.
He achieved Silver Fox fairly quickly.
Yes.
Just to let folks know, we're going to be talking about all sorts of things on this show. We're going to be talking about what we learn about the Empire, because one thing that's great about the show is that it goes into the early days of the Empire and how it sort of takes over and why people support it, which is really interesting. We're going to be talking about the earliest stages of the rebellion and of like people who are against the Empire, which we see. We're going to be talking about the characters, because the Bad Batch itself is this fascinating group of characters. But there is going to be a not insignificant level of clone thirst. Because, like, that's, and I'll admit, it's a thing that I didn't really know existed until I kind of watched the show again and again and uncovered the group of folks who, you know, I'm on record on this podcast in general saying that, like, there's a lot about the prequels that I didn't really understand until I listened to the people who'd grown up with it in that kind of a way. I want us to talk about the individual characters and hopes for the new season, but let's kind of just go over some of those major themes. And let's just kind of start with the clones, because you've said before this is something you really love. Obviously, you have some strong feelings for a couple of the individual ones, which I think is in and of self funny, because the whole idea is that they're all clones. They're all the exact same.
But they're so different.
And yet, as the Clone Wars show, they're not the same by any means. So let me just kind of start there with a general question. Like, what is it about the clones as a group of characters that you find so fascinating and so interesting?
Yeah, I feel like it's the, like, battle for humanity that they have consistently. Like, from the get-go, from Attack of the Clones, it's very much like, oh, they all look the same. We have that shot of them marching in unison, same armor, same everything. And so, at first, they're presented as very much like Stormtrooper, you know, faceless, shoot them when you have to, all that good stuff. And then we get the Clone Wars, and suddenly, not only do they have, I mean, of course, they always had faces, but not only do we see their faces more, but they have names, they have personalities, they have different tattoos, they all have different hairstyles. And so for me, I just loved the individuality of the clones and the fact they have to overcompensate and fight so much to be their own people. I just kind of connected with that as I was growing up, and like, who do I want to be? How do I want to express myself? And I think that they're having a similar journey as they're growing up, twice the speed of everyone else, and figuring out who they are as individuals and people within being like war slaves, kind of.
Yeah. No, I definitely hear that. I mean, one of the first things that I really kind of cottoned onto with them is, you know, those of you who know me know I grew up thinking I was a man. I'm non-binary in my gender. And one thing I've really been exploring is like different ways of expressing my appearance and things like that. And just being, but you know, I'm still going to always have a beard. My chin looks ridiculous. It's not a gender thing. But like, just in terms of my gender appearance and the like. But one of the things that as I've kind of studied like masculine ideas of fashion and appearance, one thing that really sticks out is how much like, you know, go to a fancy dress event and you're going to see those who are more femme presenting having all sorts of different like dresses or skirts or pantsuits or all sorts of different things. And then mostly the men are mostly going to be in jacket, shirt, and tie and pants, where the way to express themselves is probably the color of the tie.
Yeah.
Or maybe the color of the suit, or maybe the cut of the suit, but it's all going to look much closer to each other. And so in a weird way, having these clones who all have the exact same DNA structure, they're all going to be the same height, they're all going to have the same facial structure and all the rest, but wind up like the fact that we can differentiate between probably like, I think there's like 40 different identified clones, maybe even 50.
So much more.
That are known. Yeah, but in terms of like individual named characters who are recognizable because of different hairstyles, because of different scars. Like they have such a small range of things they can change from each other to express themselves, and yet we can so easily tell who is who. It was really something that was really interesting to me in terms of like exploring that idea of self-expression through appearance.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples of that is the Domino Squad, which is Heavy, Fives, Echo, Cut Up, and is it just 4?
I think so, yeah.
I feel like I'm missing someone. Anyways, it's these group of clones that we meet originally on the Rishi Moon in Clone Wars, which is this episode where there's these rookies working on a backwater station, and then the separatists come and take the station, and it's the clones' jobs to, you know, let the Republic know that the station has fallen. And so we meet these clones, and at the end of the episode, we have this big sacrifice by Heavy. But when we see them, they all look the same. They all have the same hair, no facial hair, no tattoos, same haircut, same everything when we first meet them. And then we see them again in a new episode that's kind of a flashback to when they were younger in training. And again, they all look the same, but we're starting to get to know them more. So we can kind of hear the vocal inflections, just the way that they kind of act starts to differentiate them. And then by the time the end of the series comes, Heavy and Cut Up have died. And then we have Fives and Echo, and they're ARC troopers, and they have this really cool armor, and Fives has this great beard and this little tattoo on his forehead. And you just see their individuality come to like fruition, basically. And then we also do lose Echo. He's blown up and then captured by separatists for several years. And then we get him back, and he's actually part of the Bad Batch.
Right.
Which is one of my favorite things, because Echo and Fives, they're my little domino twins. That's what I like to call them. I was so sad when he passed.
I think also part of why you think there's 5 Domino, we start out with 5 of the Domino Squad, but I think one of them, the lieutenant, the one who's in charge, gets killed very early on, and so we never really learn about him.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great example of just how the clones become these interesting characters. And for me, I think a big part of it as well is that, as your story is just talking about, it's not that, like, it's just because they're all living, like, regular lives they start to differentiate. It's that these are people who have specifically been genetically bred to be soldiers. They're bought and sold. I mean, they're this very interesting, like, they're literally slaves, in terms of the, you know, when some of them decide, like, hey, maybe I don't want to go and be a part of this war. Like, that's desertion. That's a crime. And there's a great episode in season 1 about when that happens to someone. And I assume everyone's seen Clone Wars by now, but you know, if not, I'm not going to spoil the end of it, but it's definitely worth checking it out. But to me, I think one of the things that's so interesting is that what it is that starts to have them get all this differentiation, like, is their experience together of war.
Also, I did just look it up. There is a 5th clone. His name was Droid Bait.
What is it?
Droid Bait.
Droid Bait. Okay. Is he the one who dies early on?
I honestly don't know. He either has an off-screen death or he's killed right up front with the sergeant on the Rishi Moon. There might be two of them that die right away. And then Cut Up gets eaten by a worm. And then we have 3 of them left, and then Heavy gets blown up, and then we got 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's brutal what happens to them. And I think that's one of the things that I think is so interesting is that it's not just that they are, going out into the world and finding these identities. It's that they're forged through war. Mm-hmm. Like, they are literally bred to be soldiers. They're slaves, I think, by any definition. They are bought and sold. They're not allowed to decide they don't want to be soldiers. And when one of them does, there's a great plot line in season 1 about him deserting and how that all happens. Although it wasn't intentional desertion, but that's another story. But I do think it's so interesting that it is, and they frequently will talk about like Geonosis was this very important battle for many of them, because that was the battle in the second movie, Attack of the Clones, is definitional for many of them. And then they talk about like who are the ones who weren't at Ryloth, and that experience of war is so fundamental for them. And to me, it's one of the most interesting parts of their story, especially in their story in regard to the Jedi, is how much, these are veterans and they're having PTSD and they're having all these experiences. And it is that experience of fighting together and of bonding with each other that really starts to form their identities.
Yeah. Shall we talk about the Bad Batch?
Yeah, let's go into it. I definitely do want to. I just want to talk about that one other kind of overarching theme of the time that we're doing all this in. So yeah, what was your impression of having a show? We have all these different times in Star Wars that we're getting into, one of which is, now with Andor and with Rebels, we're exploring a lot more about the time shortly before A New Hope and all that happens. With Resistance and the sequels, we're exploring that time kind of far in the future. After Last Jedi, we've explored the Clone Wars and all that time. What was your feeling, especially both before you heard the show was happening and then while watching the show, about getting to explore this early days of the Empire?
Well, this show snuck up on me. I don't know how I missed it, but I just saw it on Disney Plus one day, and I was like, what's this? So I didn't have much time to, speculate or prepare myself, but in just the experience of it, I really liked it a lot, because it is showing you all those little things that are happening that's changing in the Empire. Like, certain credits aren't worth anything anymore. You can't, sell certain explosives anymore because that's considered, more illicit than it used to be, because the Empire is cracking down on all weapons. On Ryloth, they collect everyone's weapons. They don't allow the citizens to have any arms, which that's a whole other story. But and the chain codes. And I like how the Bad Batch is seeing all these changes and having to deal with them and reroute and figure out what they need to change. We do have an episode in season 1 of the Bad Batch that also includes that clone deserter from season 1 of the Clone Wars. Mm-hmm. And it's about him and his family when the chain codes first kind of start rolling out, and they need to get off planet. Because, if Cut's discovered, that's the clone. If Cut's discovered, their entire family's gonna be thrown in prison, whatever. He's a deserter. So I really like seeing the little things the Empire is doing and how it's affecting everyday people. This one little clone squad.
Yeah, I think it's a really fun part of the story. Especially because, as I mentioned at the beginning, one thing we see is why a lot of the people are happy for the Empire. I think it's easy to think, people would always hate this. The unfortunate thing is, and this is a theme that is, we see in history all the time, we see in fiction all the time. Unfortunately, in times of great chaos and war, if there is a strong man or a strong kind of force that can come along and say, don't worry, we're going to make everything, structured and ordered again. We're going to take care of the chaos. We're going to get the trains running and the electricity running and all that. People turn to that. I think it's one of the scariest parts, but also the most effective parts of the show. And I'm excited. We saw kind of year 1 of the Empire, and now I'm excited to see where that's going to go.
Yeah.
So yes, now let's talk about the Bad Batch themselves. Do you want to give us a rundown of kind of who's in the Bad Batch?
Yes. Okay. So, as I like to call them, the Dad Batch, because as the show continues, they just become more and more tired dads. Especially Hunter. So we'll start out with Hunter. He's kind of our sergeant. He's the leader. He's got this nice bandana and this beautiful, luscious hair. Oh my goodness, he's so pretty. And he has this skull tattoo on half of his face. And I know Danielle's mentioned this before, maybe not on the show, but there's a fan idea that tattoo goes down his whole body of like a skeleton thing. And
interesting.
I'm just really into that personally. But, so Hunter...
It's a shame that podcasts can't show how much Erin is blushing.
Right? Oh my God. But yeah, Hunter is a king. He has the responsibility for everyone. So when Crosshair, either his chip doesn't malfunction or when Crosshair, as we later see, chooses to stay with the Empire, Hunter has a lot of guilt and hurt about that. You know, he says in one of the episodes, we don't leave a man behind. Like, we shouldn't have done that. Like, we need to go back for him. And you see that kind of responsibility carry over and be poured into Omega as she's learning. And something that Cut's wife, Sue, says to Hunter is, children get into trouble. Like, they will always find trouble. It's our job to get them out of it. And so that's just a theme we see throughout the show. And I've noticed, rewatching the show, when they're fighting other clones, they will always use stun. Because they don't want to kill, you know, the other clones who have the chips. They know they can't control it. But in that same cut and run episode where they're trying to escape with the chain codes, Omega's trying to get back to the ship and a clone grabs her by the ankle and pulls her down. And Hunter immediately starts shooting live rounds at him. And at all of them. Right. They all start shooting live rounds. Because Omega matters more. And so that's...
The desire to protect is such a strong part of who they are.
Exactly.
And you're right. I think describing... Like, I'm going to call one of them an uncle, not a dad. But yes, I think
that's
definitely a strong, you know...
Yep.
The dad energy is there. And as you say that, it makes me realize we should probably like fill in a little bit more of the story before getting into the individuals. Okay. So I just want to kind of go over a bit of this. What the story starts with us in Order 66. And the clones are getting ready. The Bad Batch is getting ready for a big attack. The clones are, Order 66 happens, and the clones are now told that they're supposed to be killing Jedi. And for some reason, most of our heroes, most of the characters of the Bad Batch, they don't seem to have the Order 66 thing, doesn't really hit for them. But it does hit for one of them, Crosshair, and we'll get into who the individuals are in a second. And this all matters because there's a young a Jedi and a Padawan who has been kind of helping to lead that attack that they're on. The Padawan, it turns out, is is the person who's going to become Kanan Jarrus. So that's a whole other interesting part of the story. But basically what happens is, like, most of the Bad Batch is like, I'm not really sure we should be like trying to do this, but Crosshair is in my chip is working, good soldiers follow orders, he wants to kill, the Padawan, they wind up fighting with each other, and that's how the Bad Batch goes kind of on the run. And then so for most of the story, the Bad Batch is kind of off doing its own thing, while Crosshair is working with the Empire and hunting them.
Yes.
For all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
So, okay. With that, like a little bit of a framework, now let's talk about some more of the individuals.
Good clarification. So yeah, we talked about Hunter. I envision him as just the ultimate tired dad. And like you said, there's definitely an Uncle Wrecker for sure. And if we really want to break it down, there's probably, it's just a full family rather than the Dad Batch. But I just see Hunter as like an exhausted dad running off of only coffee, no sleep, and stim packs. And that's how I envision him. I also have this little headcanon while we're talking about him, that when Omega has nightmares about being like trapped on Kamino and being like kidnapped by bounty hunters, that she likes to go and crawl into bed with Hunter. And I think that's just so sweet. And I totally see that within his character, to be like confused and uncomfortable at first, and then just to go with it because it's what she needs.
Yeah, I think he has that caretaker vibe to him, and it's in part why he kind of he takes care of the team, but also in part because I think because he is a hunter, he's very, very good at observing, and I think he's the first one to really recognize. First of all, like, 'cause they don't like take Omega with them, like she just tags along, and they keep trying to leave her behind, and she keeps tagging along, and I think he's one of the first to really recognize both her abilities, because she winds up being able to mirror all of their abilities in really interesting ways. And we'll get to her. But like, he's the first to really realize that she's becoming part of the team and that that's okay.
Yeah. In the there's an episode where they rescue a former separatist senator on Raxus, and they leave Omega behind because they're like, that's a separatist planet. That's the separatist capital. We're not bringing her. So they leave her behind, and then they're on the mission, and Hunter goes, okay, Tech, you and Omega go around the back. And Tech goes,
right.
Well, that would be hard to do because Omega's not here. And I think that's just like shows exactly what you were talking about. As he starts to see her as part of the team and understand her useful qualities.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right, let me talk, I don't want to make you do all 5, so let me talk about Wrecker next.
Yeah.
As I said, Uncle Wrecker. He is, we know that in some ways the clones are all, 11 or 12 years old chronologically. They're designed to age a lot faster rate. Wrecker is both, he's the biggest of them, and he's very much I think you can think of them as all dads. You can also very much think of them as a D&D party. And if Hunter is the ranger, Wrecker is 100% the barbarian.
Yes.
He's just and he's the he loves all the big guns, he loves the big explosions, and he's really just a big kid. He's seriously bummed when at one point, the enemy does something stupid, and so he doesn't get to use his special bombs to blow them up. That's him and Sabine Wren would be such good buddies.
Oh, yeah.
In a way that I hope to see they get to hang out. But he, I think in a lot of ways, because, Hunter is the adult who Omega's looking to, Wrecker is that kind of uncle who, all the other adults look at side-eye, but all the kids love because he's just a big kid at heart. And
almost
there's
a
a
peer.
great, he's a peer. And you can just tell he trusts her, he supports her in a lot of ways because of that. There's some great scenes of them going out to get, what's the name of the kind of candy popcorn snack that they get?
Mantel Mix.
Mantel Mix, right, because they're on Ord Mantell, which if they're not selling at Galaxy's Edge right now, Disney marketing is doing something very, very wrong.
Yeah.
And one of the things about it that happens during the course of the season is, because one thing we realize is that some of them still have their chips, but for whatever reason their chips didn't kick in. His chip starts to kick in at one point during the season. And I think it's one of the most emotionally harrowing parts of the season, and really good because it is the one who Omega has most come to trust and has most come to see as lovable and huggable and there for her, that he now is all of a sudden the one going, good soldiers follow good orders. I have to take you in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was a really painful episode where and they built it up for a little bit where he hit his head in one episode, started complaining about headaches, things like that, the same way that Tup did in the Clone Wars. In season 6, we see another clone trooper whose chip malfunctions, and he gets Order 66 early, and he kills a Jedi. Right. So we have the same symptoms showing up in Wrecker, and, Omega's really worried about him, worried about this, surgery that they have to do to remove the chip, and right as they're about to do it, the chip, fully takes over. And he grabs Tech, chokes him, throws him across the room, takes out Ecker and Hunter in one fell swoop, and they're like, okay, we need to lead him away, whatever. And Wrecker finally tracks down and corners Omega, and she has a gun on him, and she's like, don't, Wrecker, please, this isn't you, it's the chip, I'm your friend. And he swats the gun away, and he's about to shoot her, and then I believe it was Rex stuns him from behind. And they do the surgery, and when he wakes up, Omega's by his side. She refuses to leave his side. And he wakes up and she's like, oh, you're okay. Yay. And he's just, I am so sorry.
Yeah.
And that moment, just to see him so serious and so remorseful, just really hit home.
Mm-hmm. It really does. And I think it gets to some of the really underlying themes of the whole show about how much are these people in control, in terms of the actions you take. And granted, the whole idea of the chip is, there's a lot of debate about the chips and to what extent they have total control or their influence. And that's a question I hope is going to get further resolved in season 2, because it's still left a little murky in season 1. But just that idea of these people who are fighting against what they have been trained to do, I think is one of the most impactful parts of the whole story. And it's one of the things I most love about Wrecker's story. And he's a character who's definitely painted with a very broad brush, you know? And so I think, like, the first time I watched it, it was so obvious what was going to happen with him that I think I was a little cynical about it. But then the second time I watched it, I really kind of got sucked in by, like, just how, you know, how harrowing this would be for her, especially.
Yeah, and one little detail I appreciate about Wrecker is how he is big. He's kind of an oaf, you know. He misses a lot of nuances. He's kind of the comedic relief. But he's not dumb. You know?
Yeah.
Like, he is their weapons expert. He is the explosive expert. He knows how to disarm a bomb in less than 10 seconds, you know, all that good stuff. And we see him teaching Omega some of these skills. Which I just liked that, the depth to his character, that he's not dumb. And he is a genius when it comes to, like, weapons and explosives and what he's good at, you know?
And he's the sort of person who he's very good at particular things, and he's very comfortable letting other people take over where he's not good, you know? Like, 3 people will be sitting around talking about a plan, and one person will go, well, yeah, but maybe if we attack this group, and Wrecker will go, okay, let's attack this group. And the other 2 will go, no, wait, but there's problems. And then he's just like, okay, I'll just listen.
He's like, sure.
It's very endearing.
Yeah.
All right, so who do you want to do next?
I want to die.
Who do you want to talk about next?
Well... We'll answer the other question later, but I'm going to talk about Echo next. Echo is, for background, I mentioned him before. He was part of the Domino Squad, and then the Domino Twins. It was him and Fives. And he is kind of lost, blown up on a mission to rescue Admiral Tarkin. Who at the time was, I think, a lieutenant or a captain or something.
Right.
And so that was an interesting episode to kind of see Tarkin's animosity towards the clones already. And then Echo, in the first few episodes of The Bad Batch, he sees Tarkin is on Kamino. And he tells everyone, like, oh, this is bad. Like, this guy hates clones. Like, this guy... I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I did rewatch the episode of Echo, you know, being lost and blowing up recently. And there was something where... it really was Tarkin's idea or Tarkin's fault that what happened to him happened.
Well, I think it's because Tarkin, in many ways, to me, Tarkin is kind of the Republic officer equivalent of Pong Krell. And that he sees the clones as, in many ways, I think what they were originally meant to be in a horrible way of, like, paid for Republic property. And, you know, the simple fact that the clones have names is themselves a part of their individuality because they're supposed to just have numbers, like, like property. Yeah. And like, so I think that's the thing is that for Tarkin, and him and Anakin have some really chilling conversations, where they kind of see eye to eye. But yeah, for Tarkin, I think it's, I don't remember the exact details, but at some level for him, I think like, you know, the clones are resources, so sacrificing a few resources to protect a larger group or to protect him is perfectly acceptable. And I think that's kind of what happens with Fives.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry, with Echo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Echo, was a clone that I had a lot of love for in the Clone Wars, so I was really happy to see him back in the Bad Batch. I think Season 1 Echo was a little bit of a background character. We didn't get into him too much. You know...
Part of it I thought was that, because Echo is interesting because he's not part of the Bad Batch in terms of being like genetically different from the other clones. He is 100% a clone, but he's been kind of turned into a cyborg because for a long time he was basically plugged into a separatist computer to be a part of the separatist battle planning and all this. So now he has like all these computer enhancements. I think this was the only other, not like problem, but the only thing I think was a little bit off about the first season is it feel like, because there's also one named Tech who we'll get into, and I feel like part of why Echo becomes somewhat of a background character is that it's not really clear what the differences are between what Tech can do and what Echo can do, in terms of that they're both sort of like computer focused, very much so.
Yeah. I feel like the main difference brought up between them is that Echo is officially a reg, as they call them.
Right.
Okay, so what I'd really like to see from Echo in Season 2 is I want some more, like, trauma. I want to hear about what did happen, you know?
Right.
Like, and how that affects how he acts today. Because he is different than he used to be. He's a lot more serious, not as fun-loving, and he's very skeptical and, like, cynical towards the world.
Right.
And especially like anything having to do with the war. He still very much is like, go the Republic planets are good, Separatist planets bad.
Right. Which I think is really interesting because one of the things that we're seeing which I think is really interesting because one of the things that we've seen all the way up until the Rebels and Andor era is that, the Empire has now taken over and in a way kind of like is trying to wipe away the difference between Republic and Separatist. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, there are both Republic and Separatist people. There are both former Republic and former Separatist people who both feel oppressed by the Empire and have reason to band together. But the tensions are really there. And like I said, you see that all the way into the Rebel days and some great episodes in those shows. But yeah, Echo is the one who, when they do have to go rescue a Separatist Ryloth senator, when they do have to go rescue a Separatist senator, Echo is the one who has the most tension about it. And Echo is the one who is, I think in some ways, like, still the most like, well, maybe we can bring back the Republic. Maybe this can be worked out. Because, yeah, I think all of these clones fought in the Clone War, but he was the most affected by it. He was the one who was taken prisoner and who was really traumatized in ways you're right, we haven't seen yet, but would be interesting to explore further.
Yeah, and he also had a completely different experience than the rest of the Bad Batch. They were a specialty group. They were Clone Force 99, which, let's take a moment to appreciate the fact that they're called Clone Force 99, named after our beloved Clone 99, who was a genetically defective clone, who was kind of old, and he was like a janitor at Camino and just very much loved everyone, and he had a very heroic death. So I appreciate the mention to him in the name.
Definitely.
But yeah, Echo was very much like on the front lines of like the marching battles, the big battles. And they were very like sabotage, very little assassinations, little things like that. So I think that that's like an interesting difference that they all have. And it comes up a lot when they're like planning and talking about things, where Echo, I feel like, has a very typical approach and they maybe think a little more outside the box.
And I think it's also helpful because, as we've already seen, they do wind up interacting with other of the regular clones. Because it's not like they're just all dropping dead, and some of them have had their chips removed, like Rex, and are helping them. Others, like some of the ones you mentioned, their chips are working, and so they're working for the Empire. And Echo is often able to be the one who can kind of most connect with them, or at least be the bridge between them in ways that I think are really interesting.
Yeah.
Because they do, like, even the term regs, like we see in the first episode, there was definitely some tension between the Bad Batch and the rest of them, as is pretty common in military when you've got like special forces versus like the regular grunts.
Yeah. One thing I really would like to see more of, if we do get Rex back in this season, is I'd like to see, I kind of want some painful conversations with him in Echo, maybe just reminiscing about the 501st, or a little quote or mention to Fives, like something like that. I would love to see a little callback.
Right.
And I don't know if they're going to do this, but I would really love to see Echo kind of start to like heal. Like, he's really pale. He, doesn't have any hair, gaunt. He looks horrible. But like, he's been out of the Separatists' clutches and on his own for a while. And so I'd love to see maybe some of his skin color come back, maybe get a little hair. I don't think they're going to do it, but that's something I would really love to see.
It could definitely be nice. Yeah, I would agree with that. Let me talk about Crosshair, because Crosshair, I love villains. I love the haunted people. It does make me laugh, by the way, that like so many people are like, people who don't really understand Star Wars often think like, oh, it doesn't have the depth of like a Star Trek. Star Wars is just, laser swords and fights. And here we are like, give us the trauma. We want the trauma. Like, Dave Filoni, if you don't punch us in the feels every week, something is wrong.
No, literally.
We're broken people. But that's not a story entirely. But like, so Crosshair he's the, as you can imagine from the name, he's the sniper. He is, and he's got this like, he looks older than all the rest in a way that I think is very interesting. He looks like gaunt and thin, and he's got this like literal crosshair tattoo across his eye, which is both like amazing and just, I have 2 tattoos. They did not feel great, and they're on pretty safe areas. The idea of getting that part of my body tattooed is just, like, more power to anyone who can do facial tattoos.
That's how you know he's hard as nails.
Exactly. But the thing with him is that he always, like, even when they're in the Bad Batch, he's the most jaded, he's the most cynical, he's the most, like, I don't care about all the politics stuff, just tell me who to kill and I'll kill them and I'll go on with my day. Which, especially when you think about a sniper's role, that kind of makes sense. Like, that he's not in a, like, kill or be killed, my adrenaline is up, this person, he's like, no, this person is no threat to me in this immediate moment. They're a mile away or, hundreds of yards away or whatever it is. And I'm going to kill them with a sniper rifle. Mm-hmm. And it fits for his character. And so when he is the one who doesn't go with the rest of them, and he says that line, good soldiers follow orders, which seems to be kind of the code of the chip is working and making them not think for themselves. It's already really powerful. And you could have just had him be just, Joe Villain. He's now the mustache twirling Imperial. What I love is that you give him such a deep story in that he's the one who first is supposed to lead some of these new Imperial conscripts, and he doesn't get along with them, in part because they're not as brutal and bloodthirsty as he is, which is hard to watch. But also you see it, like, he goes back to the room that he used to share with the Bad Batch, and you see him, like, looking around at, like, the notes on the wall of, like, how many missions they've done and missing them. Mm-hmm. And so there's a running theme, I think, throughout the show of will he eventually come back to the Bad Batch? And the Bad Batch surely wants to rescue him at various points in time. And I think one of the most, like, harrowing parts of the show, because so much of this is about, like, getting rid of people's chips. And if you get rid of people's chips, of course, they'll do the right thing.
Yeah.
Early in the season, the Empire does some kind of, like, experiment on his chip. And later on, we learn that his chip has actually been removed or deactivated or something like that. So that he is no longer doing this because of his chip. He's just doing this because he believes in the Empire, and he believes what the Empire is doing is right.
Yeah.
What's your kind of take on Crosshair as a character and, like, what we see about him?
Well, in my little notes here from rewatching season 1, I had one thing written about Crosshair. Mm-hmm. I want more murder daddy Crosshair in his sexy all black armor. Like, that all black armor. Woo! And I was rewatching this morning, and also just, like, the musical theme that they have for him. So scary. Really it's so good. Mm-hmm. Just like the feelings it evokes. I love so much. But yeah, it's like, it's hard because he is the most jaded, he is the most cynical, and he always was. We see that in season 7 of the Clone Wars. He's kind of the one who picks a fight with Rex, who's like, whatever, we don't need to go back for this guy. He's just another reg. He's talking about Echo. He ends up on the same squad as Echo. So that's kind of an interesting thing there. But yeah, I think you're very right about he's not in the close fighting, like the adrenaline. He's kind of always the one with the power. And so I think it gives him kind of this, like, ego trip of, like, no, it's like, I'm the one who, like, watches over everyone. Like, I take out the bad guys that people can't see. I'm the one with the power. And I think that kind of is why he wants to stay with the Empire. They're the same way, they're very, like, power oriented. Mm-hmm. And so I think that he kind of connects with that. About his chip, I don't know that I believe it's been removed.
Interesting. Okay.
I know in that...
It is a subject for some debate. I know the show tells us that it has, or that it's... He says, I'm no longer under the influence of the chip.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's probably... It is very possible that that's not accurate.
Yeah. So, I don't know which way I would rather have it. I think it's more interesting for his character that it is removed. But I think if we want, like, a quick redemption arc for him, having it still be there at this point, I think would make more sense. And maybe it's removed later. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just something. I wasn't sure that I bought it just because the only person we heard it from was him. And he's been so jaded towards the Bad Batch since they left him. So I thought we never left a man behind. So, like, I thought I was part of your squad and you guys just don't care about me. And so I could see that as, like, a very backhanded thing to say to really hurt them all, I don't have my chip. I just don't want to be with you guys.
Yeah, I really appreciate how they set it up in a way where, and this is kind of something that Star Wars has been doing more and more of, it's not asking you to be sympathetic towards the fascists, towards the Empire, towards whatever, but it is showing you that that a person can believe that they're doing the right thing like by being part of the Empire. And like I fully understand that Crosshair is not a mustache twirler. You know, he does think that out of because of his sense of like, no, the Empire is like bringing law and order. It's good. I don't think it's good, but you know what I mean? But also, he has all these hurt feelings. Like he genuinely believes that the Bad Batch betrayed him. And I think they set that up in a way where it makes sense. And I agree with you. I think they could do good storytelling either way. I think for me, the thing that I hang on to that I think is what proves that he doesn't have the chip anymore is that he hasn't said the phrase "good soldiers follow orders" since like the thing that happened with the chip.
That's true.
So that's what I think is the real clue. But I think you're right. It could be the things, and especially it could like. I like decision making. I like agency. I like characters having agency. And so for me, and granted, I think this is just kind of a problem with how Order 66 happens in that prequel movie. I know I'm a heretic for critiquing anything about the prequels. I apologize. You can make a joke about how old I am, but like for me, it is characters are more interesting if they are wrestling with decisions instead of just like, I was under control, so I did this, and now I'm not under control, so I do that. Yeah. And so, like, I like the idea that either the chip is gone entirely, or maybe it's just that the chip is like pushing him in a way, but he still has some agency and it's how much he is or is not resisting the chip. Because we certainly saw with the Bad Batch, with Wrecker a little bit, like he did fight the chip for a little while before it took over. And I think we saw that with Rex too as well at the end of the Clone Wars. Mm-hmm. There's so much more I think we could say about Crosshair. Let's go to Omega. Talk to us about Omega. And like, cause she's the there's two more to talk about, Tech and Omega, but I think as we said, there's not too much to say about Tech, unfortunately, but why don't you take both of them?
Just forgets about Tech. You know, it's okay. I'll talk about both of them because I kind of like them a lot in tandem. So I'll say a bit about the two of them quick. I did have in my notes, I want more of Tech teaching Omega because we have a lot of these little moments where it's like Omega is his little helper and she's just so eager to learn and know things and, you know, she wants to fly. So Tech says, okay, you can fly once you memorize every single one of the ship's specifications. Like, this is how it works. This is what we're going to do. And there's a scene where Hunter and Wrecker are talking about something. Tech's in the background fixing some techie thing as he does. And he's, you know, to Omega, hand me the this. Hand me the that screwdriver. Hand me the this wrench. And so I just really like, he almost like, just really sees her like as a peer, I almost feel like. Mm-hmm. Like he sees her as someone to teach. He doesn't really look down upon her. He sees her as very useful. On the episode where they are, after they remove their chips and they're still on the Republic cruiser, he's trying to get power back up and he says, Omega, I need you up on the bridge. And so he, similar to Hunter, like really sees her value and utilizes her when needed, which I like. Other than that, Tech's just great. He's a little comedic relief. He seems like where Wrecker is the uncle who loves kids and gets along great with kids, Tech is like the uncle who was like maybe the youngest in the family, never really interacted with kids, doesn't really understand how you maybe should treat kids a little differently and like have kid gloves, you know? He's just like, okay, right. You're a person and we're just going to work together. So I like him. He also, I think, winds up being a little bit of an exposition machine. Yeah. In that because he's the one who always like can dial into the Imperial plans or look at the stuff. And I think it works as a plot device, you know, and it's unfortunately part of why we don't get as much of him as a character, I think, because he's doing that. But it does help to move the stories along. Yeah. Yeah, so that's Tech. I hope to see more of him, a little more in-depth character work in season 2. So that we can have a little more to say on him next time. Yep. But going into Omega, as you said before, she is a, like, raw genetic template of Jango Fett, basically. Right. They say that she's the only exact clone other than Boba Fett. But he was lost at the start of the Clone Wars, so the Kaminoans need Omega if they want to keep cloning without having the genes deteriorate further and further. Because you can't really clone a clone and then clone that clone without it becoming disastrous. Or at least that's their explanation. I wouldn't know. I'm not a cloner. Right. But that's kind of like a big plot device for at least the first half of the season. And, the second half too. But where the Kaminoans are really after Omega because they need to secure their importance to the Empire and prove we can keep making clones that are useful and good. And so they end up sending bounty hunters after her. We see Fennec Shand, and we see, Cad Bane. We see this great little, shoot-off showdown between him and Hunter that I loved, where Hunter lost miserably because it's Cad Bane, and of course he would. Hunter, I love you so much, but no. You just weren't going to win that one. Yeah. But yeah, so that's, Omega's importance from, a high view, whatever that's called.
Right.
But I like just her curiosity for the world. She grew up on Kamino. She has never left Kamino. And so just throughout the show, she's so excited about every little thing. And it's fun to see her discovering the world and learning that you can't really trust everyone and not everything is good, but you can trust your friends and you can rely on the people who love you.
Yeah, early on, there's first, just in terms of exploring the world, there's a scene where she sees grass for the first time and dirt because she's never seen that on Kamino. But also, at first when Fennec Shand comes along, she's like, okay, sure, I'll kind of trust you, and has to learn, wait, no, not every adult is a safe adult,
Yeah. And I love, there's one recurring line that I think is just so sweet, that whenever Omega it happens when she's kidnapped. It happens when she just gets herself into trouble, but she always is saying, Hunter, I need you. And that's just a very, it always pulls on my heartstrings. There was the one scene specifically where she's on Kamino and she's trying to contact them. And then Cad Bane finds her and pulls her away. And she's just says Hunter, I need you. And they can't find her location. They can't find her. And he's just losing his mind, having an absolute worried dad moment. And so I think their connection is really, really sweet. But, as you were saying earlier, Omega kind of has these abilities. It makes you wonder if she hasn't been enhanced in the way that every single one of them have. She seems to pick up very much on Hunter's tracking abilities. She can figure that out really quickly. She's, she helps tech a lot, so she's very, tech-oriented. You can tell that she's very smart in that way also. But also she's wanting to learn how to use this bow. She also is learning how to deactivate explosives. And so I think it's just fun to see a beginning version of all of them and how she's going to grow and those abilities are going to grow and see kind of where she goes from there and find out if she does have more abilities than just them. Yeah.
I think that's a really good way to put it. And I think it's interesting because this then starts what is, I think, one of the biggest, debates during the show itself in the first season. And I think has now been mostly put to bed, but I'm curious to see if we'll reopen it in the second season and also your thoughts on it. Because during the first season, at least as I was watching it, a lot of the theories I was hearing was that what made her so special was that she was force sensitive. And that this was the beginnings of the attempts to figure out, could you make a force-sensitive clone, which, of course, is the beginnings of the research that will eventually lead to the cloning of Palpatine, however many years later, in Rise of Skywalker. I didn't love that theory because I liked that, other than at the very beginning with Kanan Jarrus and Order 66, there was no lightsabers in this show. It was not a force-focused show. And so I kind of didn't want it to be all about a proto-Jedi, yet another, Jedi hanging out in this area where they're supposed to all be gone. And it felt like at the end when they said, no, the reason why we want her is because she's that original material that we need if we're going to make more clones, that they kind of had settled that question. But I'm kind of curious, was that something that you and your people, was it something that you and the communities you were in was being talked about? Did you have, do you still want to see her be force sensitive, or do you think it's better if that's not on the table? What's kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the Force really doesn't have a place in this show. It doesn't need to have a place. It can be included in little ways. If we happen to run across one of the Jedi that's out and about, I wouldn't love it, but I'm not going to hate the show for it or anything like that. I had no idea, like, that Omega could be Force sensitive. That went over my head. I didn't catch any of that. If there are any hints to that, I felt like, yeah, I don't know. I just didn't see that at all until, I mean, I heard you guys mention it on the show, and I was like, that would suck. I don't want her to be Force sensitive. Like, what?
Okay, we're on the same page.
No, yeah.
We're on the same page here.
Same page. I just don't feel a need for it. And similar, we were talking about it with the show Resistance, where there's really not any inclusion of the Force or lightsabers, and it's perfect the way it is. It's not necessary to have that. And as far as I know from season 1, you know, none of the characters are clone sensitive. Clone sensitive? Right. Force sensitive? But yeah, those are my thoughts on Omega and the Force.
Yeah. No, I totally think that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's just I think part of it may have been because at that point, we still hadn't gotten much media that wasn't involved in the Force. And there's a part of you that's just, oh, she's special. Does that mean she uses the Force? And it was almost kind of instinctual. And I'm really glad that we're kind of getting away from that and having to have that kind of thinking. Because, yeah, I don't think there actually is much in the show that supports that idea. It's just well, she's sensitive, and we're supposed to have a Force-sensitive person somewhere in the show, right? Because lightsabers are cool. So, yeah, glad that that's not necessarily the direction that's going.
No, yeah, I love it. And I love that it's like, they don't seem to really idolize or worship the Jedi either. Like, Echo seems to be the friendliest towards the idea of the Jedi. Like, when they first meet Sid, he's like, okay, the Jedi had a contact here. His name is Sid. Right. I've never met him, but, like, he should be here. And they're like, okay, do you trust this contact? And Echo was like, the Jedi trusted him.
Right.
And Tech goes, you mean the Jedi who are all dead? And I just think that's really funny. And it's like the perfect perspective for all of them to have. They don't really understand or know the nuances of it. They're just like, okay, the Jedi were here. The chip's activated and now they're gone. And now we move on.
Well, especially because I think that's one of the most interesting parts of the Bad Batch is that for most of the regular soldiers, the Jedi were their generals, the Jedi were their captains, the Jedis were the one who were like with them day and night all the time. The Bad Batch, and they talk about this, they went off on their own missions all the time, and they didn't often have a Jedi with them. So they're much more detached about the Jedi than is everybody else. Yeah,
definitely. They didn't have, like, a consistent general they were working under.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've been going for a while. I don't want us to take too long. There's so much we could say about the show. I mean, literally, Paul and I and some others did an episode on every episode of this that you can go back and listen to. But what are some of the things you're most excited for in season 2 or like looking forward to seeing or even dreading to see? And again, I will say, holding on to the kind of attitude that Ethical Panda tends to have, I at least have not watched any trailers. I've avoided as many as I can the spoilers. And so we might say things where if you've watched the trailers, you're like, what do you mean? Of course we know that it's going to be this thing. This is just, we're always going to be the kind of like as few spoilers as possible. So we're just talking about what we know from season 1 and the greater Star Wars universe.
Yeah. So my overarching hopes for season 2, first and foremost, I want Hondo Ohnaka. I want our pirate king.
Yep.
He would be the perfect little side episode, you know, an arms dealer that they meet or someone they run across and they're both trying to get the same score or something like that. I would just love to see that. I definitely want more Rex, simply because he's the best. And also, I think he raises a big question for the Bad Batch of, like, do we re-enter this fight into fighting for something bigger? Because Rex is very much back on board with the rebellion, trying to fight back against the Empire, and they're very much...
isn't he... Because I remember in Rebels... we find Rex where Rex is kind of off on this planet with Wolf and I think 1 or 2 other clones, and they're just doing these hunts for these big beasts, and they're kind of totally disconnected from the whole fight. And the Rebels crew has to pull them back in. So it wouldn't be this, well, we don't know where Rex is now, but I think Rex is moving towards a time when he's going to be disconnected from the fight for a long while, isn't he? Or am I getting my dates wrong?
No, you are right. It's an empty space we haven't explored yet, because...
yeah.
The reason that Rex finds the Bad Batch is because he is involved in the very start of the rebellion. Because, he's the contact that Trace and Trace Martez and Rafa. That's her sister's name.
Right.
Trace and Rafa, he's their contact that they're trying to get information to help fight back against the Empire. So he's definitely, at this point, he is involved. And maybe during the show, we will see what happens to get him so uninvolved. Because you're right. When we see him in Rebels, not only is he just like on a backwater planet minding his business, he's very wary about getting back into the fight. He doesn't really want that at that time. So it will be interesting to see what happens there.
I think same with this. I don't necessarily want a lot of Force users on this show, but I think if there's any who we might see for a little bit, it might be Ahsoka. Yeah. Because there's a lot of characters we don't know. Like, we know that she pops back up during Rebels. We don't know what was she doing with these 15 years, especially because how was she hiding from the awareness of the of Vader and the Inquisitors and all that. I mean, by this point, the Inquisitors don't even exist yet. Like, we might start to see the beginnings of that. Well, no, I think that happens more in the Rebels era, so probably not that. But yeah, I don't want to see Force users. I wouldn't mind if we saw a little bit of like Ahsoka and Rex and like how do they decide to kind of pull back from everything. Mm-hmm. We know that there's kind of the beginnings of like kind of like underground railroads for some of the like Jedi who did survive Order 66, and I can see the Bad Batch getting a little bit clued into that. Yeah. But yeah, I'm hoping we don't get too much of that it dominates. But I do want to see more of like, I don't know what happens for these 15 years. And I love the idea that the Bad Batch could show us more of that.
Yeah. I like the idea about the Underground Railroad, because we do see that in the show Kenobi. We see that very heavily, and there's even a mention of the Jedi Quinlan Voss, who's in the Clone Wars. He's also in the book Dark Disciple, which is really good.
Really, really good. Yeah.
But yeah, we see he left a mark, on the Underground Railroad. And so he could be a really great character to include, actually. And maybe, like, the Bad Batch gets involved in smuggling Force-sensitive people. Maybe that's part of how they're fighting back against the Empire. Or maybe they're just being paid to do it. Yeah. And so that could be really fun to see. I'd love to see, I always love to see Ahsoka, but I understand if she doesn't fit into the show. But yeah, I think Quinlan could be a really fun character to have back too.
Mm-hmm. He really is. He didn't have much of a role in the Clone Wars, but he had some important ones. And the book Dark Disciple is just, it's one of the most romantic books that's written in the Star Wars universe, which there's a lot of the non-Disney canon, the Legends canon that I've come to really enjoy. And I'm sure some of it has some romance that's well written. There's some of it where, like, the Darth Bane books are some of my favorite books in Star Wars, except for the fact that I'm fairly certain the author has never been within 100 feet of someone who wasn't male. It's just the writing of the women characters is so bad. But, like, they're all femme fatales, and they're all, like, it's that kind of nonsense. Thank God. But, like, yeah, you come to Dark Disciple, and A, it's a very good romance, B, it's such a great story. It is such an interesting exploration of light side, dark side, and by the end of it, Quinlan is he's come back from the dark side, but in such a jaded, like, I've lost everything, I've lost the person I love, I'm not really sure where I fit anymore way, that, yeah, seeing him in this period would be really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like he's making his way into that, like, gray Jedi category, where you see and recognize both light and dark, and you use and utilize, both light and dark.
Definitely. Any other big things you're looking for?
Yeah. One specific thing I want real bad.
What's that?
It's not going to happen this season because I've seen some of the stills that have come out. But I want Hunter with a bun. I want a man bun. Okay. I want a man bun with that bandana. I want it bad. Uh-huh.
You heard it here first, folks, man. I've started doing, like, the pull the hair back, and, like, I heard that man bun was a bad word, but maybe it could be a good thing. And I'm not saying I'm Hunter, but, if Hunter can pull it off, then maybe the rest of us can know that we can pull it off too. So I could see that being an interesting look.
Mm-hmm. I want it.
Yeah. I think I want more of these characters. I want more Crosshair. I want to see more of where the stormtroopers come from, and one thing I think that's very interesting is they've made very clear that, like, part of why they have the stormtroopers is to save money because they're just a lot cheaper to get. That they made a reference to their armor being a lot weaker, which is kind of important because as we found, like, there has never been a moment in Star Wars that I've ever seen where someone hit a stormtrooper with anything, be it like a laser or a punch or a rock, and and the armor stopped anything. Mm-hmm. Like, the armor is just cardboard.
Yeah.
Like, maybe a reference of Tarkin and being like, let's cut the budget for accuracy training with the rifles. They'll be fine. Yeah. But yeah, I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more of the Empire development. And I think I just want to spend more time with these characters, because you're right. Found family is such a great theme. And I think that there is such a strong element of it within the Bad Batch that I'm just really excited to see how that develops and to see where Omega goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. One last thing I want to say also about Omega, that is, representation is something obviously that I care about a lot. And I think I'm interested in where this will come down, but I hope the show will address to some extent where her gender comes in, because she is female. And on the one hand, if she is an exact genetic clone of all the other clones, like, there's an argument then that maybe she's trans. Mm-hmm. If maybe she is AMAB, basically, assigned male at birth. But there's nothing to indicate that. And I don't think the show is going to get into a transgender discussion necessarily, but it would be everything they're saying. Nothing has ever explained why she winds up being female. And if it is the character's agency, that would be awesome. If it is I took biology and genetics 30 years ago, but my memory is that every embryo starts out female, and then the ones that become male biologically, at least, all these phrases are very hard to use. I apologize. But, so that might be a reason, but I'd be curious to see if they'd explore that at least a little bit, or at least just give us some kind of knowledge about that.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely questions about Omega, because they say she's the only other exact genetic replica. Okay, why is she a female? And why is she blonde? Right. Why is she blonde? Where did that come from? The only other blonde clone is Rex, and I'm pretty sure he dyes it. I'm 100% sure he bleaches it.
That is a California peroxide man.
So, yeah, it would be interesting to get into more of what exactly is happening with her genetics.
Yeah, I think so. So, we'll see.
Yeah.
We're going to start wrapping up by now. This is going to be the last episode of this year. Starting next year, there is going to be a Patreon that we're going to be launching for Ethical Panda. There's a lot of stuff going on with the podcast that I'm doing. There's some big changes happening over at Superhero Ethics that you heard me talk about over there. And I want to be able to keep creating all this great content for you, but it is expensive in terms of the equipment that's used, the time and effort and all of that, the editing and all that. So you can always keep listening for free. That is always going to be a thing. I don't ever want anyone to feel pressured. But for those of you, a lot of people express desire to express support. There's going to be a Patreon. And one thing that's going to happen is, if you're at a Patreon at a certain level, it'll be fairly low. You're going to get some bonus content with every episode. A lot of times it's going to be, especially on Superhero Ethics, kind of okay, what are you watching that's similar to that? Erin and I are going to chat a little bit about what the bonus content for that will be. So it's not going to be as a part of this episode, but probably the first episode of Bad Batch itself we will have for you, and it'll be for free. Just give you kind of a teaser of what it'll be like, and then we'll hopefully start having it as part of the Patreon. So please check out the Patreon. Please check out all the other great ways to support what we're doing here. The simple best thing is to share this with people. If you're excited about the Bad Batch, if you're talking about the Bad Batch, if you want other people talking about the Bad Batch, please share this podcast with some friends. We're going to start having more reels online, where there'll be a 30-second or 60-second clip of something we're saying from, and it'll be on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, those kinds of places. Well, Twitter, as long as they allow it to, before it becomes a huge dumpster fire. Who knows? But just want to share the link with someone, or just tell someone about it. Those are all great ways to help support us. Also, feedback. As we go forward with Bad Batch, we want to be in discussions with you all. And we might take your feedback episode by episode. We might do it as every 3 weeks or so. We'll do just a feedback episode. Not sure what it's going to look like yet, but definitely send in your thoughts and your feedback. So, if you go to theethicalpanda.com, there you'll find all our information, Facebook, Twitter, email. Best way to reach me is just Matthew@theethicalpanda.com, and I'll share all those with Erin. But also just anything else that you want to send in, be a part of the conversations, find it all there. So that's the Ethical Panda side of things. Erin, for you, where can people find the other stuff you're doing? Because you're doing a lot of awesome stuff right now.
Yeah, I mostly do Ahsoka-related cosplay things. I'm currently rebuilding my armor, and I'm about to rebuild my Leku, the headdress, as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I like to document those as I go, maybe post some other funny things. Right now on my Instagram, I'm doing Christmas Ahsoka pictures.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. So my handle is lady.tano.creates. That's for Instagram and TikTok. If you want to check me out there, follow along, see what I've got to offer, that'd be cool. But other than that, I just cannot wait for this season 2. I have been on the edge of my seat since it was supposed to come out in October. And then they delayed it and I ripped all my hair out and I cried. And now it's almost January, so I can breathe easy again.
And I'm really glad for that because I admit I was, especially after Andor, and because Andor was so good and also that I know Ahsoka was coming, I was worried that I'd have a little bit of like, okay, Bad Batch is fine, but when do I get Ahsoka? Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm so glad you and I are going to be talking about this because you have so much excitement about it. You're reminding me of all the reasons I'm excited about it. Paul might come on for some episodes. Hopefully Danielle and AJ and Matthew Capel and some of the other guests we've had are going to come on. And, it's not just going to be all sunshine and roses. It's not going to be all sunshine and roses. I'm sure there'll be some stuff that one of us doesn't like or that, just doesn't fit right or whatever it is. We'll be honest about that. But I think it's just so fun to be excited about Star Wars. And there's just so much great content coming out, and I'm really looking forward to it. So, Erin, thank you so much for being a part of this. To all you fans and listeners out there, thank you all so much for all the awesome things you're doing, and have a good day.